In this segment, we'll talk about Hong Kong Airline, Cathay Pacific. Who started this airline? Two mavericks, one Australian, one American, both wartime pilots in this part of Asia. There's a problem though. Airline is very much a national business. It's a flag carrier for the authorities in power. So when the British returned to Hong Kong, that didn't quite sit well with them, that an Australian and an American were flying the carrier of this British colony. So by 1948, Cathay Pacific was taken over by a contingent led by Swire. And working with them was Australian National Airways because of the experience in the airline business. In fact, Cathay Pacific was not the only airline working in Hong Kong at that time. British Imperial Airways had by then become BOAC before it became present-day British Airways. And with Jardine Matheson, they started a company called Hong Kong Airways that was going to compete with Cathay Pacific as well. So what then happened? The Hong Kong government needed to broker a deal between those two airlines. So in 1949, early in 1949, they brokered an agreement between Cathay Pacific and Hong Kong Airways so that Cathay Pacific was going to fly south of Hong Kong, whereas Hong Kong Airways north of Hong Kong. That was all fine, but then we know what happened with advances of communist troops throughout mainland China. So soon enough, the big market of Shanghai fell, and later on it was Canton as well. So what was the area of Hong Kong Airways? Not so much anymore. And that was a bad deal for Hong Kong Airways. They tried to resuscitate the service by following the nationalist government, flying to Taipei, and also up the coast, up the Pacific to Japan, and then South Korea as well. But then those could hardly compensate for the loss of traffic that China represented. So by 1959, Cathay Pacific basically took over Hong Kong Airways and became Hong Kong's only airline for the balance of the colonial era. Commercial aviation is a very standardized industry. Governments regulate the routes, how often you can fly, how much you can charge. In that sense, it's quite boring. But then as competition developed, especially among the budding carriers in Southeast Asia, one needs to differentiate. One needs to create a brand. In fact, that was not specific to Asian airlines. It was a global phenomenon. All airlines were conscripting the bodies of their female flight attendants, fashioning them into brand identities that would help produce a visual imagery of what the airlines were about. Cathay was no different. This business suit that was to represent Cathay Pacific, that was going to be the brand of Cathay Pacific, would very much remain in the domain of foreign designers for the remainder of the colonial era. In 1983, Hermès design was going to replace the Balmain's design, and in 1990, Nina Ricci's design superseded Hermès as well. It was not until the post-colonial period when our own Eddie Lau designed the first ensemble for Cathay Pacific. So what's the brand message? We see in a 1971 advertisement that Cathay Pacific issued in its important market of the United States, that the message it wanted to create was one of cosmopolitanism, not just Hong Kong alone, but the whole catchment area that was Cathay Pacific's. What you see on the poster are the many faces of personnel working the airline. British pilots, Commonwealth pilots, engineers as well from that part of the world, Swiss chefs. And then in addition to these engineers and pilots, you have the prettiest faces of 9 lands smiling at you. Lands, clearly enumerated but loosely defined, exuding this oriental charm that was to represent Cathay Pacific's catchment area. So in the 70s, Cathay knew that it had to allure you to the catchment area of the Orient before they can just get you settled in Hong Kong and be a tourist here. But then how did Cathay become local then? Remember the origin of Cathay being Australian and American, dissolving into a British Commonwealth configuration led by Swire. Well, that quickly dissolved into a local British Hong Kong by the 1970s. Cathay was a joint venture, actually, between Swire and Hong Kong Bank. That became an issue by the 1980s as the future of Hong Kong became problematic. What was Cathay's response? Cathay recruited locally. Cathay wanted to fashion a sense of it being a Hong Kong airline. We're talking a lot about the cadet program, for which Cathay was hiring a lot of local pilots, trainees. Cathay was quite slow in that particular venture because most of the airlines would not worry about much having to train the pilots. They get a lot from the Air Force. Hong Kong had no Air Force, still had no Air Force. So for your local pilots, it required a lot of investment for training, getting them up to speed. And there's usually quite a long process that took years. Why did Cathay do it in the 80s? It was in the aftermath of the Joint Declaration of 1984. Cathay didn't quite do it in isolation. It was the first time in a long while that Cathay found its first local rival in Dragon Air. Dragon Air was an airline started by a bunch of business people backed by Beijing. And they were starting to fly into and out of the important market of mainland China and Hong Kong. To respond to that, Cathay needed to recruit locally and brand itself as a local Hong Kong airline. In addition to this whole cadet program, it also needed to shed its image being a British airline. After all, Swire is very much a British company. So in 1985, they decided to go public, announce its public offering to the people of Hong Kong. The airline was very proud of its IPO, which is close to 33% oversubscribed. And the money that was involved apparently was the equivalent of 10,000 Hong Kong dollars for every single man, women, and children in the colony. And the amount raised was even more than the money supply of Hong Kong. That wasn't quite enough because it's just local Hong Kong and required a little bit more to shed its British image. Cathay Pacific had to welcome Red Capital. Through many rounds of negotiation and reorganization that involved Dragon Air as well, Cathay Pacific, by 1997, had become an airline that was co-owned by Swire, along with a major partner in mainland China called CITIC. So what seemed to be a seamless transition actually required a lot of delicate footwork, both in the boardroom and also ownership structure. So as we look at Cathay Pacific and the entire industry in Hong Kong, what do we see? Well, there's a lot of historical happenstance. It was not by Hong Kong's design that we got into the Cold War and that funneled traffic through Hong Kong. It was also lucky for us that we developed a financial wherewithal through industrialization and also our logistics industries. But then what remained important was how Hong Kong was geopolitically located at a very critical junction, a junction that people from various parts of the world, including America, Europe, would like to meet. And the appeal of that throughout the process? Mainland China. So it's no surprise that sitting here in 2024, the mainland Chinese market remains a dominant customer base and also a source for our traffic through this juncture of commercial travel.